Welcome everybody to this first meeting of an experimental nature where we combine the University's AGM and the statutory meeting of the General Council. My name's Nigel Lindsay and I'm the convener of the Business Committee of the General Council, and it's my privilege to welcome you here today and thank you all for turning out on such a dreich day. It's good to see such an excellent turnout for today's meeting, and if this format works, we'll try to carry it on through the years. As many of you probably know, recent changes to the Scottish Government's Code of Higher Education Governance require Scottish universities to hold an annual general meeting at which they give an account of their work during the year and make themselves open to questions from the public. In Aberdeen, we've decided to try the innovation of combining that meeting with the statutory meeting of the General Council, which normally takes place in the winter. I'm conscious this mic is echoing a bit. Can everyone hear? Okay. This new format has necessitated us moving the General Council from its normal date in mid-December to late January. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone here for accommodating this date change and allowing us to have the meeting today. I would welcome opinion from members later, perhaps informally over lunch, on how well the format works. The plan for today is that we'll start with the University's AGM. I'm delighted that our new principal, George Boyne, is with us, only in office, and that he's not here just in office, but also since last week officially installed. He will no doubt want to reflect on his first 6 months in office, but more importantly, I hope he will cast his eyes forward and let us know how he foresees the university changing and developing in the months to come. I'm also very pleased to welcome David Beattie, our Director of Finance, who will take us through the university's accounts. David came to speak to the Business Committee earlier in the year, and I know from that he has a talent for both brevity and clarity in his presentations. After George and David have spoken, I shall say a few words about the work of the General Council and its Business Committee over the last 12 months. And then we shall have a short question and answer session, which Caroline Ingalls, the Secretary to the University, will facilitate. After that, I hope that we can move fairly seamlessly into the statutory meeting of the General Council, and after that, we're all invited to lunch next door. I shall invite Professor Boyne to address us in a moment, but first I should mention that we've received a number of apologies for the meeting today. Among these are Martin Gilbert, the Senior Governor, who is unable to be with us today, but does send his best wishes for the success of the meeting. I also bring apologies from two members of the Business Committee who had hoped to be here today, but have been prevented by business or family matters from attending, and they are Lynn Menny and Willie McCall. If anyone else has apologies, perhaps they could pass those to the Secretariat. Now, George Boyne joined us in August last year from the University of Cardiff, where he had been Pro-Vice-Chancellor and was previously Dean of the Business School. He's also a double graduate of the University of Aberdeen and therefore a member of the General Council in his own right. And I think I can say the same thing for David, who also graduated from Aberdeen. In the short time since he arrived here, George has become known for clear thinking, sound vision and effective leadership. George, we're very pleased to welcome you here today as principal and as an alumnus of this great university. Over to you.
Thank you. And it's an enormous pleasure for me to be here making this presentation to you. Let me start by thanking all of you for your interest in the University of Aberdeen and for giving up part of your Saturday morning and indeed early afternoon to take part in this event. I'm grateful that so many people in Aberdeen have a close interest in the university. I think it speaks volumes about the connection between the city and the Northeast and this wonderful institution, that we get quite rightly a lot of support and scrutiny and interest in our activities. What I'm going to do is to run through briefly what has been achieved in the last 12 months, including the period that I've been here and indeed before I arrived, and then look ahead to the next 12 months and to a longer period for the development of the institution. But I want to start by reminding us all about the purpose of the University of Aberdeen, which has been unchanged since 1495. This is our foundational purpose as summarised by Bishop Elphinstone. It has guided us through the centuries, and I want to reassure you will continue to guide us in our development in the years, decades, and I trust centuries ahead. This is a very important statement because it is compelling in its vision of what a university should be. Open to all means open to all students from wherever they may come, regardless of their characteristics or their background. Open to all staff who may be willing and able to make a contribution to the institution. Open to our external partners in government, in business, in the local community, in Aberdeen, the North East, and in the wider world. So that's the first piece of this foundational statement that we continue to try very hard to live up to and realise. Secondly, dedicated to the pursuit of truth. Of course, this is about the knowledge and the science and the understanding that we are here to develop and create and to use to educate our students so that they are fit to make a contribution to the modern world. And then lastly, in the service of others. And I think this emphasises how important it is for the university to be outward looking. We are not here for ourselves. We are here to make a positive contribution to communities in Aberdeen, the North East, Scotland, and internationally, wherever they may be. The purpose of the university is to make the world a better place. Everything that we attempt to do should ultimately lead to that impact on the world around us. So that's the foundational purpose. I hope you're able to tell just how important it is to me, and it certainly is to the university community in general. Next, I want to move on to some of our achievements in the last year that have helped us to continue to fulfill that foundational purpose. And here are the highlights for the calendar year 2018, and you'll see there are many highlights in the year that has just gone past. Of course, I am not claiming any credit for any of these highlights, given that I just arrived 6 months ago. It is, in fact, testament to the tremendously hard and successful work of both the staff and the students here that so much has been achieved in the last 12 months. The Queen's Anniversary Prize recognising the outstanding quality of our research in health. This prize awarded only once every 2 years for a truly exceptional contribution to knowledge and to impact. The fact that we were named Scottish University of the Year is an absolute gift for someone like me arriving or coming back to the university and helping to develop our profile and make sure that our external partners appreciate just how good the work is here. Globally, the Times higher ranking of 158. It's a little bit irritating that we're not allowed to say that puts us in the top 1% of universities in the world, because apparently that breaches some advertising code that the Competition and Markets Authority gets a little bit excited about. But we know that there are more than 20,000 universities in the world, and frankly 158 is conclusively within the top 1%. But that's not on any of our branding. Good improvements in the Times and the Sunday Times rankings. We're squarely within the top 30. I would like us to be squarely within the top 20 on a consistent basis, and we're putting plans in place which I trust will help us to accomplish that. And then lastly, we had this very successful quality enhancement review of our teaching quality, which gave us the highest possible assessments of how good the teaching is here and how good our processes are for assuring the quality of that teaching. So I've been fortunate to arrive in a year of success where there are many things to celebrate. Let me move ahead then to the priorities for next year, and these are setting in place some of the actions that we'll be taking beyond 2019 for the longer term. In the next few months, we'll be expanding our teaching and research complement, growing the academic staff community. That's important as we seek to develop our research profile and our teaching quality to ensure that we have the right number of staff for the students we have. And of course, we're looking to grow the student numbers, so it's important that the staff numbers grow in proportion in order to ensure that the teaching quality remains high. I have a personal commitment to widening access, and as you've already seen, that is part of our foundational purpose, that we are open to all, so that we're able to attract students from Aberdeen, the North East, and the rest of Scotland, regardless of their personal circumstances, and we give them the opportunity to study at the University of Aberdeen. Next, international student recruitment. I need to tell you a little bit here about not only our global aspirations, which are to be in the service of others across the world, but also just to say a little bit about our funding context. You may be aware that the funding from the Scottish Government has been roughly flat for a number of years for universities in Scotland. We're not on our own in this position. This is how it is across the Scottish university sector. While that Scottish Government funding is almost flat, and I need to emphasise, I understand why it's difficult for the Scottish Government to raise funding for higher education when they have so many other pressing priorities, including other parts of the education system and indeed health. So we recognise that that's not an easy choice for the Scottish Government to make. At the same time, we need to be meeting our rising costs. We have staff costs and other costs, even if we maintain staff numbers at the same level, going up at about 3 or 4% a year. So we need to find other ways to raise our revenue, and international student recruitment is one of those. So it's helpful not only for our global reach, but also for our financial sustainability that we grow international student numbers, and we have plans in place to do exactly that. Next, for those of you who are not immersed in the technicalities of higher education, you may not be familiar with the Research Educational Framework. This is an assessment of the quality of our research that takes place once every 6 or 7 years or so. Once that assessment takes place, it stays with us for the next 6 or 7 years. So we are locked into that ranking for quite a long period afterwards. So it's absolutely right that we put a lot of attention into this and get the best possible outcome, both for the quality of the publications, the knowledge we produce, and the practical impact of that work on the wider world. I mentioned earlier that we need to be outward facing, and that includes engagement with business and other communities in Aberdeen, the North East, and the wider world. So we're putting extra attention into how we engage with that broader business community to ensure that we understand their needs and are able to respond effectively to what the industrial community would like from us. And then lastly on this slide, we've had a campus in Doha for about 2.5 years. There is huge demand for our expertise in that part of the world. Like us, it's an energy economy. We started with a couple of hundred students just a couple of years ago. That's gone up to 400. The demand is far exceeding our current capacity to meet it, and that's why we're looking at a second phase campus, which over a period of 10 years or so is scheduled to grow to around 5,000 students. And that's an initial mock-up of how it will look when the building is finished in about 2 to 2.5 years' time. I was in Doha just this week to literally put a shovel in the ground along with our partner in that part of the world to get the building program moving on this second phase of the Doha campus. But I want to remind you that in addition to the investment in Doha, we are also investing in the capital estate in Aberdeen. And this next slide is our science teaching hub, which will be on St Macher Drive. You may have come past it as you've come to the campus today. We've got some lovely hoardings around it celebrating all of our recent successes, and that will allow us to develop the campus in very significant ways here, especially for science teaching. So that takes us through the initial plans for 2019, but we are looking much further ahead. The university's current strategic plan is for the period 2015 to 2020. It's a 5-year strategic plan, and that's quite typical in the higher education sector. But not every university in the UK, in fact very few, have the tradition and the history and the longevity of the University of Aberdeen, with centuries of achievement behind us. I think that means we should be looking further forward than only 5 years. So we're scoping up a 20-year strategic plan starting in 2020, which is our 525th anniversary of our founding. So it seems entirely appropriate to me that we look ahead for a much longer period than 5 years. We'll be engaging with all of our stakeholders, our current staff, our students, our alumni, the community that you represent here today, in thinking about how to scope up that plan to specify the priorities and how to achieve them. And we're focusing in particular on 4 strands that you'll see there at the bottom of the slide, which reflect our foundational purpose. Inclusive is a contemporary interpretation of being open to all, as I've described. Interdisciplinary is the contemporary expression of dedicated to the pursuit of truth. The problems of the modern world cannot be tackled by single disciplines. We need all our disciplines running at the major challenges of our time. We want to be international. Initially we were set up to be in the service of others in Aberdeen, but now we can be in the service of others anywhere in the world where our expertise can make a distinctive difference. This doesn't mean we're going to try to be everywhere and do all things. We need to be very careful to identify opportunities to be in the service of others in parts of the world where we have distinctive expertise that can benefit local populations. And then lastly, we need to be sustainable in all its senses, in the sense of financial sustainability, but also environmental sustainability, and to have the right culture in place so that we're able to continue to meet the foundational purpose of the institution. So I'm going to finish with a sign of our birthday celebrations to come in 525 for our 525th birthday celebrations, but also to ask you for advice when you get the chance to ask some questions later on. How can we ensure that we make this as inclusive as possible and to bring the community into this process of strategy development and celebration? Thanks for your attention. There will be an opportunity to ask questions in just a short time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, for what I think everyone would agree was an inspiring address and helps us look forward with confidence to the future. David, can I ask you to present now?
Steal the clicker from you. Thank you, Nigel. Hopefully everybody received one of our glossy accounts in your pack today. So what I'm planning to do is just take you into some of those numbers within the accounts, give you a sense how the university has performed through the course of the year, and take a little bit of a look forward, some of the challenges we have ahead. We prepare our accounts in accordance with financial reporting standards, and at times I would have to say they are quite difficult to interpret. So what I'm going to try and do is take you below those numbers and give you a sense of how the university is funded and how we spend our money. So looking at the income first of all, university turns over around about £220 million a year. George mentioned earlier on in terms of how our funding comes to the university, the block grant that we get from the Scottish Funding Council, and 34% of our income comes from that funding council. And again, as George had mentioned, that there's been a strain on that. We've had cuts in that, or it comes in at a level flat cash each year. So you can see that that part of the business is constrained, and therefore the need to grow other parts. And the part we can grow is the tuition fee income. So at the moment, we've got 25% of our income from tuition fees, but it gives us an opportunity to grow that area of the business to I guess, cope with the cuts that we're receiving in other parts. So the university turns over £220 million, and this is how we spend our money. So generally, most universities have a profile around this, where we spend most of our money on the staff costs, the 60% for this university, 30% on our operating costs, and then we've got depreciation and finance costs, around about £22 million. And then when you pull this all together, and this is where it becomes a little bit difficult to understand and interpret, but when you pull it all together, we have a deficit before other gains and losses of £7.5 million. I'll draw your attention to the figure in the 2018 column, the second from the bottom, the actuarial gain in respect of pension schemes. This is one of the changes in the accounting regulations. We have a number of pension schemes who either we run ourselves or we participate in. And those pension schemes, the valuations on those schemes go up and down as the stock market changes, as market conditions change, etc. So what we've got to do is recognise the change in the value of those pension schemes in our accounts. So for the last year, our own pension scheme has a deficit, but that deficit reduced by £13 million. So what we've got to do is recognise that in our income and expenditure account. So when you look at the bottom line number for the university, our comprehensive income, and in a sense our surplus for the year is £9.7 million. Now, I think we always try to get behind those numbers a little bit and try to explain that a little bit more to you. We try to look at what the underlying position of the university is. If you take out all the one-offs, the changes in the valuation of the pension scheme, the things that happen only in 1 year, so we might get a windfall of income, our assets may go up in value or down in value. We try and take all those things out. What we're trying to get to is our underlying position for the university. And at the bottom line here, taking all those one-offs out, the underlying position for the university is a deficit of £3.9 million. And that compares to £2 million from the year before. And just taking a further look back at how that has moved over the years, we had a deficit in 2015, moved to a very small surplus in 2016, £2 million deficit in 2017, and a £3.9 million deficit in 2018. And as I come to the end of the presentation, I'll talk about how that's going to move in the future. Just a quick glance through the balance sheet. So a very strong asset base. We've got £600 million of fixed assets and net assets of approaching £400 million. And those are represented by our endowment, which is around about £49 million, and then we've got unrestricted reserves of £341 million. And cash is important, as any business, cash to the university is important. The blue bar represents how our cash has moved over the last 4 years. So despite those underlying deficits, the cash position of the university has improved. We're sitting with a little under £30 million of cash in the bank. And as George mentioned, that the science teaching building, which is going to go ahead in the next couple of months, having cash in the bank to be able to pay for that is important. So in terms of cash position for the university, being able to invest back into the assets is important to us. But looking ahead to the financial outlook, I would have to concur with George. I think it's going to be hard to see how our government funding is going to increase. I think we're going to be faced with, I would imagine, fairly static funding from the government. Pensions, you've probably picked up in some of the financial press around the issues around pensions and the pensions valuations and the deficits in those pension schemes. So that's an issue we're going to have to grapple with as a sector, not just as a university, over the next wee while. And then Brexit, I guess, really unknown, but potential impacts for the university. And I think our challenge is to meet this by growing other income streams, diversifying our income. And just a little peek ahead, I guess, to our plans over the next couple of years. That is our historic underlying surplus or deficit. Our plan is, over the next 2 years, to move to a deficit of £3 million next year, and then go to a break-even point in 2021, and then push on into surplus after that. So that's a very quick run through the numbers, and happy to take any questions in the question and answer session.
Thank you, David. I think the figures were very clear from what you said, and again, as you just mentioned, we'll have questions and answers later on that. I'm obliged to the university for making space in this annual general meeting to allow me to say a few words about the work of the General Council and its business committee. The General Council consists of graduates and, what's often forgotten, many staff members as well. And it was established in each of the ancient Scottish universities by the same legislation that amalgamated Marischal College and King's College in Aberdeen, the Universities Scotland Act of 1858. That far-sighted legislation, some of which is still in force today, gave General Councils a duty of making representations on the well-being and prosperity of their universities. How that's actually done, of course, changes from year to year, and there have been particular changes recently due to the court's decision to do away with the post of General Council assessors a few years ago. That's made it timely for us to redefine our role. I think I'd like to just say a word about the Business Committee, which works on behalf of the General Council. It manages the affairs of the General Council between the statutory meetings, and it comprises 21 members elected by the General Council. And these members tend to be graduates who have accomplished much in a wide range of careers. At the moment, we have among our membership distinguished Aberdeen graduates who have made a name for themselves in academia, in education, in business, in public service, in the law, in journalism, and in medicine, for example. And I want to emphasize that this is a strong resource which can be put at the disposal of the university and which we are glad to have exploited by the university. In looking at how we could redefine our role in the light of the changes doing away with the assessors, we decided last year to have a strategy day at which we could have some clear thinking about how we should move forward and how we could meet our purpose under the 1858 Act without the General Council's assessors on the court, at least for the meantime. This strategy day was ably facilitated by one of our members, Willie McCall, who unfortunately had to withdraw from today at the last moment. I found this a very invigorating event, and during it, we developed a vision of how we could take forward our role. The strategy day led to the establishment of 3 work streams in which each was led by one member of the committee and had around them 5 or 6 other members. The first and the most basic was to define new terms of reference for ourselves. This work was coordinated by another of our members, Ewan Mackenzie QC, who I'm glad to see is here with us today. And that work has now been completed and gives a firm foundation, I think, for the whole of the rest of the work that we do. And I would like to just give you a summary of what the work done by that committee recommended. It split the work of the Business Committee and the General Council more or less into 3 parts: representational, promotional, and scrutiny. Under the first, it was to represent the interests and views of the General Council by engaging actively with graduates of the university and other members of the General Council in order to seek and convey their views to the university. I think it goes without saying that these are views on wide-ranging strategic matters rather than day-to-day management. The second part of the work was to promote the well-being and prosperity of the university by 6 or 7 aspects, 3 facets in particular. First, assisting the university to identify, achieve and evaluate its strategic goals. Secondly, considering making representations on and assisting with specific issues of concern or importance to the Business Committee and General Council. And thirdly, and perhaps this is a newer aspect of our work, promoting good relations and mutually beneficial arrangements between the university on one hand, and on the other hand, business, the professions, politics, and other outside organisations and bodies. And the third facet of our work going forward is scrutiny, and in particular, seeking to ensure that the administration, governance, and strategic direction of the university are consistent with the university's well-being and prosperity and its traditions and values. In other words, trying to take a longer view of the university's strategy than has hitherto been taken. And in that regard, of course, I'm delighted by what George was saying about the longer strategic planning purpose. The second work stream that we set up a year ago was led by Duncan McNiven, a former Registrar General for Scotland, who helped us to consider the university's strategic planning process. I have to say that this work was started 6 months before you arrived here, George, and what struck me was the congruity between the work we've been doing and the points you've been making, which delights me. As a result of the work done by Duncan and his committee, we've developed detailed proposals on the strategic planning process, which is, of course, central to the well-being and prosperity of the university. And we've given those proposals to the Principal and to the University's Director of Planning. Duncan was invited to join the Courts Away Day, which was the first step towards the new strategy, and we will keep in touch as the planning process continues. I want to give you a flavour of the work that Duncan's group did by just quoting 2 or 3 brief parts from the paper that he wrote, and you'll see from that how closely it matches what George was saying in his presentation. Duncan's group wrote that the current plan has a 5-year time horizon. While that might be most appropriate for planning purposes generally, it's little more than the period of study for most students. If the university is to have a secure future, attracting high-calibre students and staff, continuing to develop research specialities fitted to the needs of society, and providing the right estate of buildings to accommodate their work, a much longer planning period is necessary. The Business Committee considers that there should be a published plan with a horizon of 20 or 30 years under which strategic plans are developed. Duncan's group also added that it was not clear to them that the current strategic plan drives the corporate effort of the university. We took the view that the next strategic plan needs to mobilise the whole organisation and hence needs to be drawn up in consultation with all interests, with senior leaders throughout the university personally and publicly committed to the achievement of the goals. It should also include more detail about its aims will be achieved and how the desired outcomes will be measured during the period of the plan. With that as a foreground, the group came up with aims which were endorsed by the full Business Committee, threefold, of committing the university to a closer collaboration with the community of the North East of Scotland, including in particular its industrial and commercial sectors, Robert Gordon University, and the 2 local authorities, perhaps also Murray Council, and NHS Grampian. Our second aim was that it should devote more attention to attracting students from disadvantaged areas, particularly in North East Scotland. And thirdly, we felt the strategic plan should commit the university to helping the UK and the Scottish Government to implement their industrial strategies. The representations we made on the strategic plan are obviously much longer than that and contain many other facets which I think would be of interest to people here, such as collaboration with other universities in the north and perhaps rebuilding links with northern universities in Scandinavia that we've had in the past and that have fallen away. Rather than me trying to summarise the whole paper, I think it may be useful if I ask university officers to put this paper and the terms of reference paper on the General Council's website so that everyone's able to have a look at them. But I would commend them both to you as examples of how the General Council is looking to contribute to the work of the university as it moves forward. The third area of work we decided to pursue was to identify ways in which the General Council could engage more fully with its members. We want to work with this with our excellent colleagues in the university's Alumni Relations Department, and I would here like to pay tribute to our colleagues there and what wonderful support they do give us. But of course, the General Council's membership is not restricted to alumni, and we need to engage with all members of the General Council. That work is as yet at an early stage, but we want to look at practice in the other ancient universities, perhaps holding statutory meetings further of Aberdeen rather than always in the university here, and looking at ways of enabling members to perhaps Skype in and use other new technology to join in, and ways of involving recent graduates in our work. And I hope no one will consider it particularly unflattering if I say that looking at the assembled company, I don't see very many recent graduates. And it would be nice if we could bring in more representatives of the graduates of the last 10 or 20 years, who are, of course, the overwhelming preponderance of the university's graduates. I hope this summary of our work has given some idea of how the General Council and its Business Committee are renewing our purpose and helping to sustain our concept of the community as our concept of the university as a community of learning, in line with the purpose that the Principal has so eloquently outlined. I hope also it will have made it clear that moving forward, the Business Committee and General Council want to play a positive role in the development of the university and to contribute to that as the expertise and knowledge of our members allows. We hope very much that we can discuss face-to-face with the court and senior officers of the university how that contribution can best be taken forward. Thank you very much. Now, could I ask Caroline... Could I ask Caroline if you would be willing to facilitate the question and answer session?
Yes, thank you, Nigel. So this is the opportunity at this part of the meeting to ask questions to any of the three speakers today, to the Principal, to Nigel or to David. Could I ask you simply to raise your hand, catch my attention? And the console in front of you has two buttons on it, mute and speak. When it's time for your question, if you could use the speak button, but if you could please put it off when your question's finished, because it does affect the other microphones. So can I now open the floor to questions, please? Yes.
Hi. You were talking about the flat funding from government. And I heard that, for example, the Glasgow universities have taken advantage of the low interest rates in recent years, right, to prop up, to create new buildings and all that stuff. I heard that Aberdeen sort of missed the bus on this. What's your take on taking on loans at low interest rates? And why do you think Glasgow universities were reckless in doing that?
That's a topic we've discussed with Court this very morning, in fact, before we came to this meeting. And we are interested in taking advantage of low interest rates, but not in a way that would be excessive or reckless. There are clearly investments that we could make in the estate, in our traditional buildings, which have wonderful exteriors, but the internal of those buildings is not quite as wonderful as the external facades, and we have plans in place to bring the interior space up to the quality of the external facades of the buildings. So I don't think other universities have necessarily been reckless, and I think we have an opportunity in a restrained and careful way to take advantage of the external capital market, which continues to provide low rates of interest in order to upgrade the internal aspects of our buildings to make sure that they are fit for purpose for the students that we wish to recruit. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Yes, at the back.
Hi. Excuse me. I have a question for David about the accounts. You mentioned just at the end of your presentation that we don't particularly have a cash problem, and in fact the university has been generating cash despite the fact that it's losing money, which must be a puzzle to a great many people. But I see that the on the face of the accounts, there's a depreciation charge of about £19 million, which is obviously not a cash outlay, and contributes to the deficit. You know, so I guess that's why we're generating cash. But when I looked at the balance sheet, I could see that, I thought that at least a proportion of that 19 million would be going back into reinvestment. And yet, not only has it not been, but it looks as though the purchase price of our fixed assets has dropped by about 10 million. So it kind of looks as though on the face of it, the university is generating a deficit on total costs, including depreciation, but that depreciation charge not only doesn't represent a cash cost, but it isn't particularly closely related to the university's reinvestment in capital stock either. And I'm just wondering if that's part of a strategy to maintain cash and keep the capital stock run down, or whether it's accidental, or what's happening here.
Thanks so much for the question. I think in terms of the cash, we look to keep a minimum cash holding, I guess almost rainy day money in the bank, and a number of universities do similar in terms of keeping that cash. You're quite correct that depreciation is a non-cash item, so yes, while we are making on the face of it paper losses, that the cash has actually been building up. We have a 10-year cash flow plan and for investment plan. So every year we take to court a 10-year look in terms of how the cash is going to pan out. We look at the investments that we are going to make over those 10-year plans. So it's a longer-term strategy for cash and investment that we look at for the university. It's really important, and I think you're alluding to, that we keep on investing in the assets to upgrade those. But we take that look over a longer period, and you get individual fluctuations in year, but taking that view over 10 years, and George talked a little about potential borrowing, taking that view over a longer period to time the strategic plan as well.
So just to summarise, the fact that we're generating a lot more cash than we're investing is temporary.
Yes, I think you need to take a long-term view. At this current point in time, yes, we are generating more cash than investing. When you look over a longer-term cycle, there will be times when we'll invest more than we will generate. So we'll have to look at that over a long period.
Okay, thank you. We've got 3 questions queuing. So Sir Graham Cato, Councillor McHale, and then I'll come to you for your question. Graham.
Sorry about that. It's a long time since I used these microphones. I apologise for the question. I want to go back to the students from disadvantaged areas. Could you tell us what proportion of students currently come from disadvantaged areas and what number you're hoping to achieve in the future?
The current figure is around 5%. That's 65 students. And I'm hoping to raise that to 130 by next September.
It sounds an ambitious aim, but actually when you look at the numbers, it's a very small number to achieve. So I wish you well.
Thank you very much. You're right that it is ambitious because we're starting from a context in which not many students in the North East fit the Scottish Government's definition of disadvantage. If we were to look at a wider definition of disadvantage, I think we already meet the 10% target, but the responsibility upon us is to also meet the definition that applies across Scotland. So it's ambitious, but I believe it's achievable.
Okay, Ron, may you ask you to have your question, please?
Sorry, good morning. Could you just make a comment, first of all, in a question? I was at the inauguration, and I thought it was fantastic, and my colleagues from the council felt the same. What was impressive, I thought, in the programme, you mentioned the achievements of the university. And I didn't know all of that, and I'm sure that many people round about don't know that we're the 3rd in Scotland, or the 158th in the world, and so on. And I think maybe you want to take advantage of that, because if I was a student looking to go to university, and I saw that this is Aberdeen is that university that's third in Scotland and will soon be the second and maybe even the first. I'd want to sort of capitalise on that. I would sort of make that point. I was going to ask the question also about widening access for students in the North East, and I just wondered how you were going to go about that. I mean, as you've mentioned, I'm an Aberdeenshire councillor. I'm on the Education Committee, and I attend awards ceremonies of the children who are leaving, the students who are leaving to go, and they're always asked where they're going to go, and I was always quite surprised that not as many as I'd have thought mention Aberdeen University. Some do, and obviously they've got reasons for that. So I just wondered how you're going to do that. And when you say widening access for these students, how does that affect the entrance qualifications? Is it still 2As and 2Bs to get in here, or are you going to be changing that? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really interesting set of questions. The most important thing for us, I think, is to have closer relationships with secondary schools in Aberdeen and the North East. I'm making a very small personal contribution to that by visiting the 12 schools that are in the most deprived areas in the North East and meeting directly with pupils who may have considered university but need a bit of encouragement and some extra support. The extra support that we're providing is free accommodation for their first year of study with us, so that if they come to us from a deprived area, in their first year, they'll pay nothing for accommodation with the university itself. And then the last part of your question is about the qualifications. We're focusing not only on what's already been achieved, but on the potential of each applicant and what they will be able to achieve if they come to us. So we do flex the formal qualification requirement by taking into account their circumstances. So it's easier for some pupils to get high grades than others, depending on their personal and family circumstances, and we take that into account.
May I invite you now?
Good afternoon, thank you. I've got a couple of questions for David about pensions, and I apologise if the answers are in the text, but obviously I haven't had time to study it in great detail. I'm pleased to see that the funding of the pension schemes has increased since last year, but there's obviously a bit to go with the deficit recovery plan. And I wondered if firstly you could tell me what period the deficit recovery plan is built on, and secondly, there's still obviously defined benefit schemes which are becoming less and less common these days, and is it planned to continue defined benefit schemes rather than moving to defined contribution schemes? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So in terms of pensions, the university has two main pension schemes. One we are part of, the university's superannuation scheme, which is a large number of universities across the country are part of this scheme. We are one very small part of that, I would have to say. That scheme is in significant deficit. There has been a valuation completed of it. There will be a new valuation of that scheme. I think it is very likely that when that valuation is completed, that our contribution on an ongoing basis to that scheme will need to increase because of the significant deficit. We can input into that consultation, be part of that consultation, but we are only one part of that. So we do actively consult with it, but in a sense, because there's so many universities involved, we will have to accept the majority outcome. Our own scheme is in deficit to the tune of about £9 to £10 million. And we have a plan over the next 10 years to repay that. So contributions to the university have gone up. It is still a defined benefit scheme. We did have a very extensive consultation and a lot of discussion at court about whether to retain a defined benefit scheme or move to a defined contribution scheme. We had a very extensive consultation with the university over the summer on that. We had a large number of open meetings, a lot of feedback. It was decided as part of that consultation that we would retain a defined benefit scheme for the moment. But you're right. I mean, the defined benefit schemes are few and far between, and most employers, particularly in the private sector, have moved to close those and make them defined contributions. So pensions remains an ongoing issue. The valuations, it's a subject that many people have got many opinions on how to value pension schemes, and the valuations do fluctuate quite markedly depending on market conditions and the assumptions that you use. So it's an area we are actively involved in and keeping a very close eye on, but it's a very, very pertinent question.
We still have a few minutes if there are any further questions. Yes.
Sorry, what was the final part of your question?
Is there anything we can do about it, or should we just hide our heads in the sand?
Well, we certainly haven't been hiding our heads in the sand. I've been making a number of public pronouncements about Brexit. We have a very clear hierarchy of preferences as an institution because we want to maintain our wonderful community of European students and staff. So we're content with any arrangement that allows us to continue to recruit European students and our very highly qualified European colleagues. It is currently the largest risk that the university confronts, but I see a number of possible outcomes which will mitigate that risk, possibly less likely remove it completely. It has a high position on our risk register. We discuss it frequently. If I state a personal preference, because I believe in my position, I should not state an institutional preference. My personal preference would be for Brexit not to happen at all. And I think that would be good for the economy of the northeast of Scotland. If adjustments were made in other ways, then everyone could benefit from a different relationship with the European Union. But it's something we continue to focus on very closely, monitor very closely, make plans for all of the eventual outcomes, but really pick any one from 7 and plan for that.
Is there a final question? Yes, please.
You were talking about focusing on the energy sector and working with RGU on that. And I was wondering how you're thinking about diversification of industry and how the university could get involved in it, because Aberdeen Uni is, I think, better in biotech, for example, biomedical research than RGU. So why do the same as them? Because RGU has a head start on oil and gas anyway. So yeah, what's happening? Because you even have Haptogen is a poster child for biotech, right? In Aberdeen Uni. So why not focus on other sectors as well?
So you're making a very important point about the diversification of the Northeast economy. And the One Board, Opportunity Northeast, has a strong focus on industry beyond oil and gas in some of the sectors that you've just mentioned. I'm a member of the One Board, so is John Harper, the RGU principal. We meet regularly to discuss collaboration between the two institutions and how we could work most effectively to diversify and promote the Northeast economy together. So that's a regular conversation that's taking place. I'm very comfortable about collaboration with RGU in any way that would benefit the Northeast.
Thank you very much for your questions. Nigel's just pulled rank and decided one final question, and it will be from Nigel.
Which obviously has an effect on our attempt to widen access, and I think possibly also on our core funding from the Scottish Government in the formula they use. And it's been known for many years that the SIMD doesn't adequately reflect deprivation in rural areas and perhaps in remote areas like the northeast of Scotland. And I wonder if there's any scope for further pressure to have the criteria for that index reviewed.
Thank you. That's a very good question. The Scottish Government itself is reviewing the index of multiple deprivation. I believe is more open-minded than it has been over the last few years about taking a different approach to defining deprivation. That's helped by the fact that the Higher Education Minister is Richard Lochhead, who is from the Northeast, lives in the Northeast, represents a constituency in this part of the world and understands that deprivation in rural and urban communities are not necessarily the same. So yes, I see good scope for progress on that and a wider interpretation of what deprivation means.
Thank you. Well, I think we've had an excellent first meeting. I wonder if I could ask Mel Roberts, my vice convener, to give a vote of thanks.
I'm not mic'd up, so I hope my voice will carry on. Come down to the front. Oh, well, no, I think we've done a stand here. Well, it's actually to propose a vote of thanks this morning. And I thought it would be useful just to dwell on one or two highlights that I certainly picked out, and I'm sure you have as well, maybe others, forgive me, but these are the ones I thought. And I think it was really, really fitting for us to be reminded of the foundational purpose of the university. And you shouldn't have to read it, but I'm memorizing what it was. Open to all and dedicated to truth and the service of others. And we've just been talking about deprivation, we've just been talking about COVID challenges, and you've got to think that that purpose is just as sound today as it was 500 years ago. So thank you for that. I also noted some particular achievements. I won't repeat them all. I think Scottish University of the Year was pretty cool. And I will say top 1% worldwide, even though obviously it's not going to be limited. And I think those two are the things that really stood out for me. Very exciting, I think, to see opportunities ahead, but also to get pretty full and frank disclosure of the risks and also the priorities. So exciting to see the plans for 2019 and the other aims further ahead to meet the challenges of the future. And obviously some of the challenges are quite difficult perhaps to define. Great to hear about growth in Qatar, which is very, very exciting. 5,000 students in the space of a decade. So that's really rather a special achievement. Good to see as well that we're moving to a 20-year strategic plan. I think anybody who's been in the business career will see the wisdom of doing that. And also very exciting prospect of a birthday party in 2000. So it's not so far away. No, 2025. I beg your pardon. Oh well, I was going to say not so far away, but who knows. What else was I going to mention? I must say thank you very much, David, for your sharing all the figures. Most of them I have to say went over my head, so I won't dwell on them. But thank you for taking some questions and making it all crystal clear to everybody else. But that's a big deal. So thank you as well, Nigel, for just bringing folks up to speed on the work of the Business Committee. It's good and the General Council indeed on behalf of the General Council, and it's really been quite useful, I think, to get that across to hopefully a wider audience in the audience and to attract to these meetings. I was going to say something else, but I think really what I should do is also just mention the fact that this is the first time that these meetings have been held and completed in this one setting. Indeed, that's because it's been the first annual general meeting. And I think that's taken quite a lot of thinking and planning and organising. So it would be remiss if I didn't recognise the staff of the university for doing what I think has been a really good job, and I suspect will be the first of many such occasions. So without further ado, I would like you to show your appreciation in a normal manner. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mel. We now move into the statutory meeting of the General Council. I would say this meeting is open to all who are members of the General Council, and I suspect that includes almost everyone in this room. There may be one or two people who are not members. I don't think any of us would object if they wanted to remain here and sit in as observers, but if anyone wants to leave, obviously lunch will be available very shortly next door. We're not expecting the General Council meeting to take very long, so we'll move straight into it if we may. The first item on the agenda are the minutes of the 309th statutory meeting, which took place last May. Can I go through those now? Page 1, page 2, and page 3. Are those a correct record? Anyone willing to move? Thank you, Mel. And a seconder? Thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Any points in the minutes that anyone wants to pursue? Excellent, that's what I like to hear. There's now my own report, and much of it, I think, will be very brief because in my earlier presentation I've talked about the main aspects of the work of the Business Committee. But there are a few things I want to say. Firstly, statutory meetings of the General Council have usually been held 6 months apart in midsummer and midwinter. In recent years, the summer meeting has been pulled back to May for the perfectly legitimate reason that that helps it to coincide with the festivals held that month, originally the Word Festival, more recently the Mayfest. And now the winter meeting is taking place 5 or 6 weeks later than usual for the reasons I outlined earlier. And I would echo what Mel said, that it appears to be a very successful format. Having lost the symmetry of the original calendar, however, the gaps are presently of 8 months and 4 months, and this may present problems in the future, and I think the Business Committee will want to review that. Also, for that reason, my report this time covers an 8-month period and 3 meetings of the Business Committee. I want to start by mentioning changes in the membership of the committee. In this period, we've lost Graham Hunter, a very distinguished and long-standing member whom many of you will know from Scotland the What, quite apart from his work in the university. And Graham was not only for a long time member of the Business Committee, but also for a time Rector's Assessor on the Court. We also said goodbye to Mike Cooper, a distinguished member who decided not to stand for re-election after many years' service on the committee. I'm pleased to say, on the other hand, that the committee has been strengthened by the election of Mark Strange, who is the Bishop of Murray and currently Primus of the Episcopal Church in Scotland. We've also agreed that the Rector and the President of the Students' Association should be on the committee as co-opted members, and we're delighted to have them there because they share many of our interests and we share many of theirs. One vacancy remains on the committee, which we hope to fill by co-option at our next meeting, and if anyone has any thoughts on that, obviously please speak to me over lunch or to any other member of the Business Committee. As I mentioned earlier, over the last 3 months we've developed work streams started at our strategy day last February. We've adopted completely new terms of reference and we've tried to contribute to the university's strategic planning process. And I want to emphasise that these items of work have involved all members of the committee. The Business Committee is not a committee with 2 or 3 active members and a lot of passengers. All members contribute and all members have been involved in one or other of the work streams we've been following. And I want to pay tribute to the work done by members of the Business Committee and how much they've contributed to these different work streams. I want to say also that we enjoyed our first meeting with the new principal. George, when you came to our meeting in September, we were delighted to learn about your priorities and see how closely they matched our own. And your sympathy with our views and yours with ours seemed like a good omen for the future. We were also delighted that we were invited to send representatives to the Court's Away Day, which was the first step towards the Court's new strategy, and we've provided copies of our strategic plan, or our contributions to the strategic plan, to the Principal and the University's Director of Planning. We plan to keep in touch as the University's planning process continues, and we'd appreciate guidance from yourself and senior members of the administration on how that can best be achieved. We want to be active partners in taking the University's strategy forward rather than simply exchanging papers. I hope that we have in the work that we've done on the strategic plan a possible template for future work by the Business Committee and the General Council. And that is to start by identifying an aspect of the university's work which is of particular interest to General Council members. Then to take evidence from relevant university staff on that issue, and then to establish a small short life group of people from the Business Committee who have some expertise in that area to look at it in more depth. Finally, reporting back to the Business Committee on their thoughts so that the Business Committee can then make a formal representation to the University Court. And I think that, if no one here has any objection, will be the way that we try to manage Business Committee representations to the court and our interactions with the court in the future. Again, I would welcome views on this from everyone here informally over lunch. I want to say just a few words also about other work that we've undertaken in the last 8 to 12 months. We were very pleased to be invited by the university a year or so ago to take part in the selection process for the new principal. And again, we did this by calling together a subgroup of the Business Committee. And that subgroup, with assistance from all members, identified 3 criteria that we thought were important to emphasise to the search consultants as they looked for a new principal. We were, I have to say, a little sceptical about the process at first, but we warmed to the search consultants and we were impressed by how quickly and fully they understood our views and how they took our points on board. We weren't in any way party to their discussions or deliberations, so we don't know how our views were taken forward. All I can say was that we were delighted with the results of their work. During the last 8 months, we've also considered and encouraged the possibility that graduates might be able to assist the university by means of an affinity bond. Now, this is in very, very early stages of discussion, and we appreciate that there may be all sorts of difficulties with that, some insuperable, maybe some capable of relatively easy solution. But it's an idea that we want to pursue whereby graduates could take advantage or the university could take advantage of the fact that, as previously stated, low interest rates exist at the moment, and graduates might find that the university could be as good a home for their investments as anywhere else, and it might be possible through the Business Committee and the General Council to encourage graduates with some savings to invest in an affinity bond to help specific aspects of work within the university. As I say, a very early stage, but we want to look at that in more detail. We've continued our involvement with Reclaiming Our University, and it's good to know that they themselves are encouraged by the positive changes that have been coming in the culture of the university over the past year. We stay in touch with them, but like them, we're very encouraged by the way the culture is developing. Finally, members of the General Council and the Business Committee continue to play a full part in the ceremonial life of the university, participating in graduations and chapel services as appropriate. Most recently, many of our members, and certainly many here, were delighted to be involved in last week's most successful installation of the new principal. This outline of our work over the last few months is intended to show that the role of the Business Committee is being redefined, reformed and rejuvenated. I hope that members of the General Council will approve of the way in which we're trying to act on behalf in promoting the well-being and prosperity of the university. As always, I'm very happy to take any questions on our work, either formally here or informally over lunch. Any questions? Excellent. I could get used to this sort of meeting. The next item is our standard one at this time of year on membership of the Business Committee, just to give notice of which terms of office come to an end and which members are up for election. Caroline.
So there is a requirement under our standing orders to advise the General Council that there are 6 periods of office coming to an end of members on the Business Committee. Nominations will therefore For open, you can pick up a nomination form today or from the General Council website. Nominations will close at noon on Friday the 29th of March. If there are more nominations than there are vacancies, then we will proceed to an election at the summer statutory meeting. If anyone has any queries, please let me know. Alec.
Do you want to just briefly remind people who's eligible for nomination?
Okay. So those vacancies, the periods of office that are coming to an end relate to Steve Duggan, Nigel Lindsay, Tom Lynch, Jenny Mordew, Victoria Aston and Graham Nichol. And Steve Duggan and Nigel Lindsay are ineligible for a further period.
Also, more generally, it's not just any member of the General Council, I think, is it? Because I think members of staff are members of the General Council.
So, some members of staff, yes, are members of the General Council, yeah.
Yeah, but can they be nominated as members of the...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
I think it's worth clarifying possibly that most members of staff actually and a considerable number of retired members of staff are technically members of the General Council, and any one of them is eligible for nomination to the Business Committee. If there are no further questions on that, can I move to item 5 on the agenda, and that's the history of the General Council 1960 to 2020. As members will know, a history of the first 100 years of the General Council from 1860 to 1960 was published in 1963, a work of great scholarship by Louise Donald. And we're very fortunate that a graduate of Aberdeen University, Dr. Charles Calder, is now working on updating and extending that history to cover the period from 1960 to 2020. And Charles has very kindly agreed to come here today and give us an update on his work. Charles, can I invite you to speak? Do you want to avail yourself of a microphone somewhere? Yes.
Thank you, Nigel. Principal, Secretary, Convener, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I can be heard. Am I audible? Yes. Part 1 of the history of the General Council 1960 to 2020 covers the first 2 decades of that period. I began writing last May, and the narrative has now reached 1971, or to be precise, the 3rd of December 1971, because that is the date of the memorial service for Henry Jackson Bouchard, one of the greatest figures in the history of this university. Actually, it was not long before the dominant personalities of the period declared themselves. Colonel Bouchard, secretary to the university in 1919 to 1952, and thereafter he continued as law agent until 1967, when, as he said, I might as well make way for a younger man who might do it better. He was 85 at the time. John Nelson Milne, a business committee member from 1930 and convener 1949 to 70. William Douglas Simpson, clerk and registrar to the General Council and university librarian from 1926 to 66. Sir Thomas Taylor, a principal 1948 to 1962, and his successor, Sir Edward Wright. In studying the sources, minutes of the General Council, manuscript minutes of the Business Committee, which exist from the origin right up till February 1969, and the writings, the speeches, the addresses of these men, one gained a vivid sense of the range of their interests, the depth of their allegiance, and what one might call the creative spark or quality which expressed itself in such initiatives as the centenary celebrations of 1960, the production of The Fusion of 1860, this classic work which contains Louise Donald's history, and of course the Roll of Graduates, Volume 3, because without the General Council there would be no rolls of graduates. Not forgetting the restoration and enhancement of the Alton itself, not, in Sir Thomas Taylor's words, not as an academic suburb, but as a unique village community. And this was a cause particularly dear to the hearts of Colonel Butchart and Sir Thomas Taylor. On one of his last walks round the Alton, which he and Lady Taylor took, he said to her quietly, I think the main lines are safe. The business committee, as constituted in 1960, included Dr. Mary Esselmont, elected in 1931, Louise Donald, author of the History of the General Council, up till 1960, and the future editor of the Roll of Graduates, Volume 4, a task which she undertook at the age of 71. Dr. Euphemia Barnett, elected in 1942, one of the most eminent botanists of her day. John Mackintosh, known to generations of Gordonians as Johnny Mac, who edited the Roll of Graduates, Volume 3, and did it, moreover, in 2.5 years. In the days of card indexes and written communications, he did it just after he retired from Gordon's College in 2.5 years, which is pretty spectacular. Another name that people will know is Walter Humphreys, lecturer in Scottish history, formerly a master at Robert Gordon's, incidentally, who was the author of William Ogilvy and the Projected Union of the Colleges, 1786-7, which began life as the third P.G. Anderson Memorial Lecture. Dr. Roy Strathdean, universally known as Strath, a reader in chemistry, a man of great force and persuasive power, because after all, as an undergraduate, he had persuaded the Senate that it was their duty to schedule no classes or lectures on Wednesday afternoons. So we're forever in his debt. And another name which I should mention, because it fills out a picture of 1960, Dr. Alexander Lyle, one of the most brilliant medical graduates of this university, a pioneer in the use of insulin, in the treatment of diabetes, and a lecturer in clinical chemistry from 1926. He and his apprentice, more or less, were the Department of Clinical Chemistry. Then Dr. Milne, Dr. John Milne as convener, was able to run the business committee, as Molly Gold recalled, like a military operation. We seldom met for more than half an hour. I don't know whether the same rule applies now, Nigel, or whether...
Much more like.
Anyway, he kept business very swift indeed. And then Dr. Simpson, clerk and registrar, ever vigilant in all matters involving the well-being of the institution, that is to say, the tota universitas, and not any special or vested interest within it. That is what, of course, the General Council exists to promote. Like his great predecessor, P.J. Anderson, Peter John Anderson, Dr. Simpson might well have said, I am bound to my university by no ordinary affection. Like the psalmist praising Zion, thy servant takes pleasure in her stones and favors the dust thereof. One could not write a study of this type, of course, without generous help. My researches began auspiciously when Andrew McGregor, archivist, handed me one day what he called a small present. And the small present constituted volumes 1 to 5 of the printed General Council minutes extending from 1860 to April 1936, plus a typescript covering December 1939 to June 1946. This was a handsome and substantial gift which got us off to a very good start. It is always a pleasure to work in the Special Collections Department, and Michelle Gate and her colleagues have cheerfully met all requests. For example, supplying transcripts from the Oral History Archive practically at the drop of a hat. I benefited from conversations with Colin Duncan and Eric Crockart. And Dr. Olson has also provided material relating to his time as a convener. And at an early point, James and Val Henderson carried out some useful mining in the court minutes. I have two names I must mention. I'm particularly grateful to Dr. N.R.D. Begg, formerly Secretary at the University. Roddy has generously given aid and counsel, drawing on his great reservoir of experience of this institution. And I also want to thank Nigel Lindsay for his unfailing interest and encouragement, as well as practical help of various kinds. The aim in Part 1, 1960 to 80, is to illuminate a period in the history of the university and its council, which is now somewhat remote. And in particular, in the words of Robert Browning, to bring out of the shade and into the shine the achievements of some of its greatest servants. The whole work is intended to recognize the endeavors of the living and to commemorate the labor and devotion of the mighty dead. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Charles, for that typically erudite and entertaining account of your work. I know that you're aiming to stick to a timetable that you've set yourself, and that's quite a demanding one. We wish you well with your work, and I'm sure that you would welcome informal conversations with anyone here about what you're doing, including reminiscences from that period and the ability of people perhaps to point you towards other sources. Thank you for that. We're going now perhaps from the sublime to the ridiculous, in that item 6 is about the Aberdeen Kilt Walk. And as you maybe know, a kilt walk is now held for various charities in all 4 cities of Scotland. And last year, between them, raised something like £4 million. They're occasions of immense fun where people of all ages undertake to walk in a kilt, either 13 miles or 25 miles, in aid of some charity. And the benefit of the kilt walk is that the organisation itself, through various benefactors, add another 40% to whatever sponsorship the participants themselves raise. And it occurred to us in the business committee that there was perhaps a way in which we might assemble a general council team for the Aberdeen Kilt Walk later this year and walk in support of the University's Development Trust. It's quite an attractive proposition, really, because the Kilt Walk usually takes place in summer in attractive country west of Aberdeen. And I'm really looking to assemble some walkers. Again, I'm not looking for immediate answers here, but I shall be putting extreme pressure on members of the business committee to sign up for it. And I shall also be looking for members of the General Council. So if anyone here fancies donning a kilt and joining me in walking somewhere up Deeside later this year in favour of the Development Trust, I shall be happy to hear from you over lunch. Please take this invitation seriously. It could be a very enjoyable experience. I think we have the potential to raise a useful sum for the Development Trust and enjoy ourselves in the process. So have a word with me over lunch if you like the idea. If you don't, I'll be back to pester you in May. I think that concludes the business of the 310th statutory meeting. The only other thing we have to do is to give notice of the 311th statutory meeting, which I think takes place on the last Saturday of May at the time of the May Fest. So I look forward to seeing all of you there, or as many of you as can manage. Thank you very much.